What is up? Welcome to this week's episode of the Vanflip podcast. This week I am joined by Dewey Halpaus, who at one time or another was in the, would you call it a post-hardcore, emo-core band? What would you call Anatomy?
Man, everyone called it post-hardcore, but it's just a screamo band.
Okay, yeah. Anatomy of the Ghost, and then from there you went and were in the early stages of Portugal the Man. But currently, you do the same thing we're doing now. You podcast. I think you and I started the podcast around the same time, although you kept it running. You might have done a little before me. I don't know 100%, but you kept it running when I was when I took a year off, and we both are under the same management group or whatever you want to call it, Sound Talent. I think at least we were. I don't know if you still are, but you run the Peer Pleasure podcast. So Dewey Halpaus, welcome to the show. Welcome to the Vanflip.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. This is good.
Yeah. So when did you start your pod?
October 16th of 2016.
Okay, yeah. So you were a year or so before the Vanflip, but I think you were one of the only other like decently known podcasts in the space that I reference, here and there. I just told you before we got on, I don't do a whole lot of research on guests and stuff like that. However, on certain guests, I will put a podcast on in the background just so I maybe don't ask the same stupid questions, and also maybe they touch on something that maybe the host or they didn't dive too deep into, and I might try to bring that up and get some more out of them. But your podcast is one of the few that I do reference from time to time, so I appreciate that.
Of course. I'm glad to hear.
So how'd you get in? Because you started in bands back in the early 2000s. Were you in any other projects past Portugal? Because I know you were in Portugal in the mid-2000s.
No, that was it. That was the end of music for me, pretty much, because
okay.
Yeah, it's just a weird situation that getting offers from other bands and then those falling through, already being replaced in Portugal after the tour ends. I was like, you know what, I'm kind of sick of touring. And so I just stopped and haven't been back since. I still go to shows and things like that. I still play, but I haven't done anything like a proper band since.
Interesting. And have you always resided in the Pacific Northwest? Because I know Anatomy was like, if I remember correctly, from like Alaska or somewhere.
Yeah, we're all from Alaska.
Okay.
I grew up in Alaska. I was in Alaska from 4 months old to 18, and then we all moved down to do music, and that was 2000, November 2000, and we've been in the Northwest ever since. Pretty much all of us. Nick lives in Virginia now, and everyone else lives in Oregon.
Do you still keep in touch with those guys from either band?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I talked to Zach Monday, and then, Nick and Joe and I, Nick flew out from Virginia, and him and Joe and our tour manager, Logan, all went out to dinner 2 weeks ago. And then, I see that whenever the guys are in town, I usually see them. I did not go to the Portugal show that just happened. I went to the Coheed show the night before and hung out with those boys, and then didn't want to do Edgefield 2 nights in a row. So, and I'd seen Portugal enough, so I decided to go on the more out-of-town friends.
Those boys had a weird trajectory, especially in the last handful of years. They had that mega hit song. I still feel it. I remember because again, I didn't really listen to a whole lot of Portugal because around that time frame, around 2010-ish, I started getting in heavier into other styles of music, and I just kind of had gotten not over, but just kind of done listening to like scene music, so to speak. I spent like over a decade in it, listening to it every day. So I started kind of expanding a little bit more, going back to like things that I was originally into, like electronic music and more hip hop and pop and stuff like that, just because. Around 2010, I keep saying this on the podcast, but there was like a lull in like decent bands that were coming out around 2010 to 2015 in my perspective, for what I was listening to. There were also good bands in general, but and then when I heard the "I Still Feel It" song, I was like, Portugal the Man. I do remember that band name, but I don't remember them sounding like this or being on the radio or ever, So had to have been wild, for that to happen.
Oh yeah, I remember when John wrote that song. Like they'd been struggling to finish records, and then the label's like, we don't hear a first single. So I was over at his house, and he just says, I did it. I was like, what? He's like, did what? He's like, I wrote it. I wrote the song. Like, I think this is it, that for what they want. And he played it for me, and I was like, that's Mr. Postman. And he's like, yeah, I like that melody. Like, it was like a placeholder in the studio. And because, yeah, like a week or two prior, I was over there, and he's like, yeah, they want another single. And then 2 weeks later or so, he did it. And then they had so many demos for that Woodstock record. It was insane. There's like 50 some songs. And we would listen to them in the van, driving around, running errands and stuff. And everything changed quite a bit. Like a lot of the songs changed in the final version. And then that song just exploded. It was insane.
Yeah.
I would get, he'd text me a video of Britney Spears dancing to it, or Zac Efron at a barbecue listening to it, or I think it made Obama's playlist.
It's crazy.
And it was insane. I mean, but it's a classic hook. Like it's a classic melody that everyone knows. You may not know the Marvelettes, but like that song was huge. And they just took it to another level, which, I mean, that's what music is essentially. Like you just kind of borrow from here and there and mash it all together. And it just happened to work. Yeah. Lightning in a bottle. I don't think I've talked to him about it a lot. And I think the consensus is like that's not even the best song on the record. That's just the song that did it. So like, we'll never write a song like that again. We'll never have a song that's that big again, but who cares? And that's what's funny is the last time I saw them at Edgefield after that song came out, they played it twice. They played it at the beginning and in the middle of the set. I was like, why are you doing that? They're like, well, people come in and out and everyone wants to hear it. Like, yeah, that's kind of weird, but that's what they did.
Yeah.
So
Biscuit does that too. Limp Bizkit does that currently. They play break stuff in the front and then they close with break stuff. So I don't understand it, but I mean, I get it. But
yeah,
it's weird. It's a little weird, but anyway. So you kind of leave Portugal the Man in the mid 2000s, and then currently you're doing the podcast, which you started in 2016. So in that span of 10 years, obviously you said you were done with music, but what kind of things were you doing in that span before you decided to start the podcast?
Man, I started working a real job, went to college, got a degree, had a couple kids, got married, just like regular life stuff that I hadn't experienced really as an adult because we started so early. Like we were in bands together in the 90s. Like that was all we wanted to do. Like I put everything in one basket until we accomplished it. And then we did it. And it was awesome. But like I didn't do any of the real life stuff. I'd always come home from tour and be like, hey man, what have you been up to? And they're like, oh, I just finished college or had a kid or whatever. I went to a bunch of towns again and played the same songs over again. Like it's like being frozen in time. So it's like a weird thing. And so that's it. I start a family, start a career, which I'm still doing, and then the podcast. So, but I didn't go to a lot of shows in that time. I was kind of just off of music. I didn't listen to a whole lot. I started listening to a lot of talk radio and things like that.
Any particular reason as to why you kind of just want to leave that chapter behind, or you just kind of didn't do it just subconsciously?
It was kind of an option paralysis kind of thing where there was so much available then. Like that's when streaming kind of started happening a little bit. And it was crazy. Like I didn't know what I even wanted to choose to listen to. So I just didn't. If a friend's band put out a new record, I'd check it out. Every once in a while I went to shows. I did really briefly, maybe 2 years. In the 2 years after I had my son, I started working at a venue in town, and um, that was it. Well, hold on, let me jump back. So before I joined Portugal, after Anatomy broke up, I didn't know what we were going to do. Everything, we had like bidding wars going with labels, like dudes, let's hang on, we'll be set up, and they didn't want to do it. So it's like, fuck, okay, all right. So didn't know what to do, so I got a job working security at a venue in town, and with a guy, Mike Wolfson, who just passed away recently, sadly. Um, he gave us jobs, and so we were working there as security. Then we worked as like day shift, so we'd get up and go run errands or get the food orders for the kitchen or get lumber supplies for changing things in the venue. And it was really an interesting time because I was homeless for like that whole, I think it was like 3 years, 3.5, because we were trying to start this other band called The Burning Room. And we put out a record on Media Scare in 2006. And we couldn't work anywhere else in tour. So Mike would pay us cash every night we worked, and then he let me live at the venue.
Oh, cool.
So I lived in a church, basically. It's like a upstairs room of the venue that he rented out to a church on Sundays. So I got to live there from Sunday night to Saturday night. And then I had to take all my stuff and stash it somewhere and go stay at a friend's house. So the church didn't know I was staying there.
Mm-hmm.
It was so weird.
I could see
And then we had a practice space in the basement of the venue. And then I moved into an office eventually as my room. So we're playing like massive shit, like Fall Out Boy's playing there before they were massive, like right before they blew up was one of the last shows there. And there's like 1,000 people walking around outside my bedroom door.
Mm.
And then I go out and work and then come back and try to sleep. And so anyways, so it was an interesting time because I was completely homeless aside from that venue. So I practiced there, I worked there, and lived there. So once that band ended and I went with Portugal, like I didn't have to live there anymore. I would live with the Portugal guys, wherever they were living, someone's basement or where, I mean, we were all homeless. And then after I had my son, wanted to make some extra money. So I went back and started working there again as a production manager. And so I saw so many shows that way, and I just didn't care. I was just like, all right, so and so. I don't know how many times. I'm trying to think of a band that played there all the time. Like Yellow Card played there all the time, like multiple times a year.
Yeah,
like Bleeding Through, Propaganda, with a lot of repeat bands that were great bands, but I was just burnt.
Yeah.
So that was a couple of years of that, and I stopped. And then Mike passed a few years ago during COVID, and those days are over. But that was a big part of that time period. Now that I think back on it,
working at a venue I mean, I've never done that. But it has to be, a whole situation because again, you're seeing shows every other night. If you're depending on however often you work, you're seeing a show that night, no matter what. I mean, depending on what the venue caters to, obviously, some venues cater to certain lanes and others are multi-genre. So you never know. But I would assume you can easily get burnt out on going to live entertainment doing that.
Well, it was the worst. It was the worst of the worst because our practice space was there, so we practiced there. Bands played there every night, so we worked there during the shows. Then I would go on tour and be in a venue every night playing music. Then I would come back and I would, everyone got dropped off at their house and then I'd go dropped off at the club. And I'd go upstairs. There usually wasn't a show playing that night when I got back. Go upstairs, lay down on my bed, and all of a sudden a band starts practicing in the basement. And I'm like, son of a bitch. Like I couldn't get away from music. I couldn't get any quiet. And that's what really burned me out quick was there's just no reprieve.
Yeah.
In the van or whatever, there's always music going. And it was like an industrial part of town, so I couldn't just like walk outside and get some fresh air. Trains are going by and the hustle and bustle of life. It was just all I wanted to do is just be deaf for a little while because it was brutal. It eats at your soul. And something that I loved so much growing up and still do, it was just became like my worst enemy. And I think that's why, for the most part, I just kind of stopped completely.
What brought
But
you
then I
back?
really started to miss it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what brought you back into it? What reinvigorated the passion, so to speak, for music?
Um, the podcast came back. The podcast came first. I was at work and we were set and finish in this tower. Um, and I had wondered what this podcast app was on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
And my buddy's like, oh, it's just like people talking and stuff. I'm like, okay. So I got on there and I don't know how I found it, but it was Mike Herrera's podcast. And he was talking to Chris Rowe from the Ataris. And I was like, well, I like the Ataris. I like MXPX. So I put it on. It's basically, it was Mike just talking to Chris on the phone.
Yeah.
And I listened, and like an hour or something went by, and I was like, wow, that was really cool. I was like, man, I should do something like that. And so I started listening to some other podcasts, like trying to think. I started listening to Ray Harkin's podcast. And then Shane Told had a podcast. I started around then, and I started listening to those, and I was like, I could do this. Like, my dad used to do a radio show. Like, it's just catching up with friends. And I was like, this way I wouldn't have to tour, but I could connect again with all the friends from tour. I talked to my wife about it, and she's like, yeah, go for it. So I didn't know how to do anything on this on the recording side. I was always on the other side of the glass. So I had to figure that out. So ironically, I started doing some like really like DIY. Um, and I emailed Shane, I emailed Ray. I didn't know either of them before this. And they're both like, yeah, just go for it. Like, do it. I was like, all right. Very encouraging. And like, they had written me back like by the next morning. So, I did like 3 episodes. And then my buddy Matt from Emory heard them and liked them. He's like, hey, you should join this network, Jabberjaw. And so I'm going to put you on the phone with my buddy Mike, who owns the network. And so Mike and I had one phone call. And I think for another like several years, we never went a day without talking, and joined Jabberjaw. So ironically, after like 5 episodes, got connected with Mike Herrera, who then walked me through how to do a mobile recording from your car or your living room or whatever. And then it was off to the races after that. So it's kind of strange, like connecting to the people that kind of showed you that you could do it.
Yeah.
It was weird. It's weird. It's a weird chain of events, but yeah, I was texting Herrera and I was like, man, I cannot figure out what's going on with this recorder. He's like, all right, let me finish playing with my kid and I'm going to call you. I was like, all right. And then we walked through it and I've used it ever since.
Interesting.
So
you basically got into podcasting through music podcasts. Is that what?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I started listening to Rogan's podcast many years ago, and that's when I first started getting into podcasts. And then I got into No Jumper's earlier episodes. No Jumper from Adam 22. That was more of an underground. They had like a lot of underground DJs and rappers and BMX people that at the time were like in my wheelhouse. You know, I at this point I'm coming back listening to bands that I was listening to back in the day, but also trying to like figure out new bands and getting, because there was a brief moment where I left, quote unquote, the scene for a while, and you know that was kind of like No Jumper was kind of bringing me back into like wanting to know more, because he started interviewing some older hardcore guys from the East Coast, because that's where Adam's from. Adam's from like, you know, the like, I don't know, Connecticut or something. Like, he's around that little tri-state or, you know, New York, not New York, New England area. And so he started having these hardcore bands on a little bit, and I was like, oh, well, you know, this is interesting because this is a side of the world that I never saw being a fan for the most part. Because back in the day, you didn't have something like this that was so open and forthgiving with like behind the scenes stories from the band. You have to wait for like a DVD or something like that. You know, this was also around the time where like YouTube was still small, so bands weren't really uploading a bunch of content. You know, content wasn't necessarily king so far. But yeah, that's how I basically got into it. And I started a podcast that wasn't hard music based. It was kind of like we called it the new old school. And so it was me and a buddy of mine, and we had like just turned 30 or something like that. And so we were kind of like just shooting the shit about culture, pop culture, music, whatever was going on. And we eventually started having guests. I used to run a website, not to jump back a little bit, but I used to run a website similar to Lambgoat. It was called the HRN. And I would take take news from like Lambgoat, Blabbermouth, the PRP, all these other outlets, and kind of just like pick and choose what I wanted to cover of the bands that I liked. And so in doing that, I also knew that bands are willing to do pretty much anything that you ask them to if you just want them like to be a guest on your show or have an interview or whatever. Bands are usually like, yeah, totally. You just have to ask. That's the hard part. Like people don't ask, you know, for things, so that's why they don't get them for the most part. But we started doing the new old school podcast, which was a trial run of me and JP, who is also a partner in Lambgoat with me. And you know, I was like, we can just like ask people to be on the podcast as guests, and he didn't really believe me. So we started reaching out, and we had a couple guests that were kind of interesting. God, I forgot his name. Abdullah. He was from Viceland when Viceland was a channel. He hosted Bong Appetit, the show where you cook with weed or whatever. So we had him on, and then I was, like I said earlier, I'm into electronic music. So one of the movies that I would watch as a younger teenager, you know, was Party Monster, and that was based on Michael Alig and the club kids of the late '80s, and you know, Seth Green and Macaulay Culkin played those characters, and Michael went to jail for killing the drug dealer they all were friends with, and at one point or another he got out of jail. And I don't know, but we had him on the podcast shortly after that. So that was another interesting thing of like who you could get on the podcast and where, you know, all you gotta do is ask. Michael also passed away during COVID, but not that many people probably care because of what goes on, what he was a part of. But that was an interesting thing. And then at some point I was working a job it was like my 4th year working a job. And I was like, dude, what do I want to do with my life? You know, I was like, I'm in this sales job and I don't know if I want to do this forever. And I just reverted back to like, what was I doing that I was most happiest at? And it was doing the HRN or doing something, you know, online with music. And then I saw Adam. Adam was conversing with Lambgoat on Twitter. I reached out to Lambgoat because I had been going to Lambgoat for most of my life. And I reached out and was like, why don't you have a podcast? And he was like, I just don't have time. I'm one person. And I was like, I will do the podcast. Then a month later, we go back and forth, and I start the podcast in like 2018. So shortly after you. But it's been a wild ride, and podcasting is very strange, especially because I still listen to some podcasts, but I do this so much also that I don't have time to listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in the same boat. I don't listen to hardly anything, music or podcasts anymore. Like I just, I value the quiet when I can get it, because if I'm not here, I'm at home and it's loud, or if I'm not at home, I'm at work where it's loud.
Yeah, you got a family, so it's a whole different ballgame. I do not have one of those, so that's
family, and I'm general foreman for a construction plumbing company. So I'm always out in the noise and the weather and all that stuff. So, yeah, it's constant.
What are some of the like wildest guests that you've had on your podcast? I mean, because after a while you understand that you can get a lot of people, but I'm sure there are guests that you didn't think you could get that you had the opportunity to talk to, whether it's in person or online.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's guests that came to me that I was like, what the hell? That happens a lot, actually. And that was some of the weirdest ones. I've probably told the Chino story 100 times, but like, Kat Von D came to me.
Mm.
Danny Trejo came to me. Yeah, it's weird. Like Shapiro over at Sound Talent was like, "You want to talk to Taylor from Hanson? He's a friend of mine." And I was like, "You know what? I actually would do that." That was a great conversation. He's a great dude. People lost their damn minds when that one came out. Look, literally lost their minds. Like everyone that ever had a crush on or was into Hanson as a kid or a young adult all lost their minds. So many emails coming through. Are you kidding me? This isn't real. There's no way this happened. Like, no, it happened. It's real. There's people I've chased for years. There's that's something I'm struggling with lately is the whole process. It's weird. There's a whole lot going on in my head right now with the podcasting. Henry Rollins has turned me down 9 times.
Okay.
7 times personally, 2 times through management. The last time he turned me down, he emailed me and said, "Hey, best of luck," like he usually does, but like he's like, "Hey, not into it right now." And I was like, "Dude, no worries." This has been like 9 times. My rule is kind of like reach out. They say no, wait 6 months, hit them up again. Maybe they're in a different headspace. At this point with that one, I was like, all right. And I didn't require an explanation at all. But then later that evening, I get another email from him. And he's like, "Hey, I just want to clarify why I'm saying no. It's not you at all. It's not your show. It's the medium of podcasting I don't want to be a part of anymore." And that he put some reason. I don't want to put him on blast, but he doesn't like the medium of podcasting for some very specific reasons. And I was like, dude, again, like, thank you for telling me why. That makes a lot of sense, and it did make a lot of sense. And now that I know that, like, I'll back off. I'm still coming to the shows, and I'll say hi to you every time, but I'm not going to ask you about the podcast. He's like, and so like if a young kid, like there's this young kid that does a podcast.
The little punk guy, the punk guy?
Not Little Punk People. It's another kid from Ireland. He's got a really cool accent. It's so awesome to listen to. But Henry did his show because he's like, I will not say no to a young person and stand, but that young person's not going to be doing what older people do with interviews. So that was one where, the chase ended. But anyways, I'm rambling here, but I've been struggling a lot with podcasting in general, just the medium of it. And
I'd like to get into that because I also sometimes struggle with it.
It's something I've been struggling with for a while. Like I stopped briefly.
How long was that gap?
3 weeks, maybe a month.
Okay.
But I was just having panic attacks and things like that to where it's like the pressure of doing it, like it got really big. And then it became a job, and the pressure of doing it every week.
Yeah.
The anxiety of, because I don't put much stock in necessarily like the caliber of person that's coming on. Like if it's some huge rock star, I never put that much on it. Like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in 10 minutes, I'm going to be talking to so-and-so. But there's enough anxiety with it of not wanting to waste their time. Like,
right.
I want it to be enjoyable. I want it to be for me and for them. Also, when your art form is having to have a conversation that's real and also keep it interesting for someone who's not involved with it, that's going to want to listen to it, that's also a struggle. So I just noticed there's a lot of things that were coming up that way. With the panic attacks, a lot of it, like my show delves into a lot of dark spots and some pretty rough things. And I don't know why. It's just how it happens. And I find myself like rehashing those things in my head where it's like it's sticking to me.
Like and then they're like whatever they're talking about or whatever you're talking about.
Yeah, whatever they're talking about is adding to things I've already experienced and talk about. Because those are in me, like those are part of my life. But adding that to the sauce was really screwing things up in my head. And then just knowing like all day, like at work or something, like, all right, 6 hours, I got to talk to so and so.
Yeah.
It's just like it's always in your head. And then the other struggle I've been struggling with is why this can sound so lame. Like we're podcasting and I'm shitting on podcasting.
Yeah, this is good.
Why are we podcasting? Like why do I give a shit if I get to talk to why do I put time and effort in to build relationships and to be able to talk to some of these people? They're regular people, and I truly believe that they're regular people just like us. That's why I always tell like other podcasters. They're all freaked out about it. I'm like, dude, why does someone have to say yes that's not the person themselves to talk to somebody? You want to talk to someone, walk up and talk to them. Anyways, I'm rambling, but
that's what this is for.
The struggle right now is why does it matter? Like why should I put effort in my world to talk to somebody that's probably not going to remember it 20 minutes later? Why do I need that validation that when I meet somebody, it's not, hey, I'm Dewey, it's, hey, I'm Dewey from Anatomy of a Ghost. Hey, I'm Dewey from Portugal Band. Hey, I'm Dewey. Oh, hey, like at work, like, oh, ask him about his podcast. Why is it not enough that I am who I am?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I chase having something tied to it? And I've done it ever since I've been in bands. You always get introduced as so and so from so and so.
Yeah.
Oh, I talked to, I don't even have an example, but like, it's always so and so from so and so. And another thing we can get into too, this is going to be interesting because of your career, but I have a very weird relationship with the news sites.
Yeah.
That I've been pretty vocal about.
We can get into that, obviously, because
and off.
I just took over Lambgoat a handful of years ago, so I joined the team doing the podcast. But like I said earlier, I've been visiting since I was, 2000, 2001. So
sure. And that's something like Chino and I would talk about that stuff because his episodes specifically, I could just sit there with my watch and just count down when they get released to when they are transcribed word for word onto the internet. And that always made me feel dirty when it would get picked up on the blogs because I don't think a lot of people know that a lot of podcasters will send the blog sites their episode.
Yeah.
Hey, I just had so-and-so on and he said this, you won't believe it. It first happened for me with Justin Pearson from a Billion Bands.
Yeah.
Accidentally said when Dead Cross was releasing their first record. I didn't know it wasn't supposed to be known, and neither did he. So then all the sites picked it up, and he texted me. He's like, oh my God, I shouldn't have said that. I was like, dude, I am so sorry. He's like, it's not your fault. But after that, there's so many podcasters that just chase that headline.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to, and they're good at it too, because they'll just play cool and then stick it in there at the last second. And I know when it happens. And I'm like, you fucker. Like that's what's killing podcasting is that chasing that headline. And there's no real substance to most of it either. It just has a release date or this is the first song someone should hear from them. Or in Chino's case, he mentioned some things about Steph smoking a lot of weed. He also told some incredible stories that he's only told me privately that I looked at him as we're recording. I was like, you sure you want to say this? He's like, I think you can hear it in the episode. He's like, no, I want to talk about it. Talking about Paris and the attack in Paris and all that stuff. Like, all these things that were like monumentally changed the band, what they do, how they travel, all these things. And all the sites picked up on was Chino's annoyed that Steph smokes so much weed and probably ruined a bunch of shit.
Yeah.
To which I texted him afterwards, like, dude, less than 2 hours. He's like, I know, I saw it. So I'm trying to go about this the right way because it's, uh, how do you came from the podcast to Lambgoat,
Right.
and now you run Lambgoat.
Right.
I'm in the position where I literally get upset whenever I see the show get picked up somewhere for a headline. And the reason I do is because when someone else sees that, and I'm not talking about like the people that look at the website, but like when the guest sees that, I feel like they're not going to want to come back again because they felt like they got used, and they don't know that I would never send that out for promotion, or guess what so and so said, and I try to be clear about that. I also understand it's a business, and I understand I go to those sites sometimes and get news as well myself. I'm completely guilty of doing that. But what happens with what I do, I've just always gotten weird about it because there's a lot of people that won't do podcasts anymore because
right.
Stuff got picked up wrong or out of context, or it broke up a band, or it ruined some relationship. But then there's no, I think the phrase that I hear a lot is, well, you said it.
Yeah.
It's like there's also a responsibility here because these aren't live, that if something gets said, either send the conversation to the person and say, are you cool with everything in here? Or, hey, you really said some stuff here. Like, do you want this released? And they'll say yes or no.
Yeah.
So anyways, I struggle with the validity of I believe in the media. I believe in conversation and connection. I'm just struggling with, why does it matter that I've had so-and-so on the show? Because people then want to talk to me about it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, cool. But why doesn't my wife want to go out and talk to Jerry Cantrell? Why doesn't my son want to go talk?
They
don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Why do I?
Well, you wanted to at some point. That's why.
Yeah, I guess that's right. Because I
and because like it's a not to cut you off, but
absolutely.
It's a different kind of person, right? Like, not saying that we are special people by any means. We just have interest in certain things that most people don't. Like in my day to day, and I'll get to your news outlet question or your news outlet thing too after this. But in your day to day, like, the reason why I enjoy talking to, like, I'm enjoying this conversation, and I enjoy talking to people in the music world and that do podcasts as well, is because no one in my day-to-day real life does anything remotely like this. They don't even really listen to the kind of music that I listen to, and there's things that I do that I think are fucking really cool that no one's going to give any shits about, right? So I battle with that on a day-to-day basis. Like, well, am I wasting my time in life doing this? Because it doesn't correlate to like tangible, real life, touching notoriety. Not notoriety, but like my friend group doesn't give a shit. My family doesn't. I can't explain it to anybody really. They just think I'm talking to random people on the internet. And these bands, I'm not. I mean, granted, your catalog of guests are, big and small. You have a lot of bands that are well known throughout many generations and genres, right? So, whereas Lambgoat kind of focuses on a specific, little niche of that world, no one's going to care that I'm talking to like Poison the Well or the Red Chord or Convert. You know what I mean? Like, no one in my day to day gives a shit. Yeah. And so, like, I also have a problem whenever I have an episode scheduled. Like, I'm always like, I don't fucking want to do it because I know, like it's not gonna fucking matter. Like it doesn't really matter, right? But then I get done with the conversation and I'm like, man, that was fucking dope. You know what I mean? And so that's why I do that. And I, but I guess why people would care is that there's the downside of the outlets doing clickbait headlines and stuff like that. I totally understand that. But, you've probably created your own audience where people enjoy the way you talk to artists, right? So there's going to be a time where someone's going to come to the podcast for a specific guest, maybe, but the chances are people are probably listening multiple times because of the way the podcast is handled by the host.
Mhm.
That's my thought. And that's probably why the Vanflip is very small potatoes when it comes to the big podcasts. But, and to touch on the outlet thing, I do know that people submit their podcasts all the time because obviously now being behind the curtain in Lambgoat, I receive those things. I've never sent my podcast out at all, ever. We did release the first episode, which was with Chris Franz from Attila. And, he spoke about the beef that they had with Imur. AP picked that up and, that blew up. But from that, I guess they kind of like squashed the beef or something like that. They kind of reached out to each other on Twitter and talked about it. But I agree. I don't think that we don't cover podcast stuff like news topics aren't necessarily based on podcast stuff. One, because like I don't want to sit through a bunch of podcasts and try to find a clickbait headline or clickbait story or something like that. But if something comes up or whatever, like in an interview or something like that, we might reference it. Like the information comes from so-and-so on this particular episode of this or this interview done backstage at this festival. But, I agree that more people are definitely not wanting to do the podcast. And I got into it because I wanted to have that intimate conversation with artists and find out things that I've always been curious about, or to learn something about someone or some facet of the industry that I just wasn't aware about. And then I also know that there are many people in bands that probably listen to not just my podcast, but all of our podcasts. And I want to talk about the inside and outside of the industry too, and shed light on maybe some things that people don't necessarily realize. Like one of the things I always say is there's no money in hardcore and there's no money in hardcore for the most part. There's rarely money in metal, but you have a better chance probably of getting a little bit more financial success in metal because it's just bigger. It's a bigger genre. And, some kids probably, because I'm guilty of it too when I was younger, some kids look at bands and they think like, oh, fuck, dude, they got it going on. They're fucking doing this full time. They are getting paid. They're on MTV. They're on Fuse. This is back when I was a kid. And then you grow up and you realize, no, everyone's homeless and no one's got any money and the record labels are fucking everybody over and this, that, the other. So I try to make it like a mouthpiece for like, not the uneducated, but maybe the unknown of like, maybe we'll talk about some cool stories that the band has, but I also want to know like, hey, this guy does a real job when he's not on tour, or, he does this side hustle to compensate for rent and this, that, or the other. And I think, like you said, people are worried to come on podcasts because of the clickbait headlines. But the thing is, I try not to. I don't spring anything. Like I could be a much better interviewer / podcaster if I was more adamant about digging under the skin of stuff that people don't want to, or, certain people don't want to talk about. But I also don't want to make it awkward. You know what I mean? Awkward could definitely make more listens and clicks and people would know about it more. But I just want it to be like, I wanted it to be not a safe space, but I want them to feel comfortable talking with me about certain things. I don't get a lot of repeat guests just because in my head I want to get, new people all the time. But with people, I've done 150 plus of these now. And, there have been a handful of people that have been on multiple times. And the good thing is I get to meet or I get to see these people in person. And we've already have some kind of rapport online through the podcast that it's an easier conversation. And, chances are they're more willing to do stuff with Lambgoat. They're more willing to do stuff with me because I'm not that kind of gotcha reporter type of thing. And the thing with Lambgoat that we try to strive, at least with this quote unquote regime, factual base, take your opinion out of the posts or whatever your news topic, just report. You don't want to like give out like, well, person XXX is a dickhead and good that they've got their tour canceled or whatever happened. So we try to stay unbiased, and I'm not saying that Alex was like that the entire time, because obviously Alex was just running the website himself, so he could do what he wanted, and he wasn't really doing much in the real world. Like, he lived in a rural area of Pennsylvania. He didn't really attend shows or do anything, so it was easy for him to be more of a kind of provocateur of things, because he's not involved, so to speak. Whereas I'm at shows all the time. I think it is part of my life. Like, I didn't stop going to shows necessarily when I stepped away from hardcore or music like that. I stopped. I kept going, and I still do to this day, a couple shows a week if I can. So, and that's also a tightrope to walk, because I do run Lambgoat, and there are going to be times where like topics and stories do come out, like the Every Time I Die thing, where you have to post about the bad things, but these guys, and it kind of sucks. So, and then that's probably, I did have Jordan on the podcast after they broke up, and that was a real tough one. It was a very long one, like hours long, longest I've ever done. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning when we got off my time. But like, we didn't put it out. That wasn't.
Oh, that's the one. Okay, I've heard that story of that. He did a podcast for several hours and it never came out because he kind of went through everything and didn't want it out, right?
Yeah. Well, there was.
And you didn't put it out, which is kudos to you.
Yeah, there were other people.
Because you could have done whatever you wanted. With
that. No, I know, and I know, dude. That was numbers. You know what I mean? That was
absolutely.
Numbers. I cared about that band so much, and I care about Jordan and Keith and everybody involved so much that would ultimately change the trajectory of what may come in the future. Not saying that they are going to get along or they're going to get back together or anything like that, but that could have definitely been a nail in one of the nails in the coffin or something like that. And I don't want to be involved in that, and not to say that I'm like above that or anything like that. It's just that band, I truly do care about it. And it's tough for, like, I just talked to somebody today, and it's like, it's still tough to listen to Every Time I Die currently, just because of everything, but it is what it is, So, not that I am like a stand-up gentleman by any means, but I do have some kind of morals.
See, that's kudos to you on that, because there's a lot of people out there would have said, well, you said it.
Yeah.
And put it out. And that's fucked. And, I don't know. I mean, I respect what you guys do too, because you're providing a service. Just like we're providing a service. It's podcasting as a service industry. It's, yes, we get something from it. Like, full transparency, I make money at this. Like, I do, I absolutely make money at this. And that's also another thing where I'm like, these people I'm talking to aren't getting any money for this.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, they're doing this on their own time, and then I make money at it. So I didn't always make money at it. It was a long road to get there, by maybe the end of the 5th year started to, and now it does pretty well. And and I'm proud of that, because I've worked really hard at it, but also that adds to the stress of why,
Yeah.
But then, like, the friendships you make through this, like some life, like seemingly would be lifelong friendships out of this with people that you never thought you'd come across or cross paths, not being on tour and things like that. Like, hearing people, call you like a nickname, like someone you've looked up to for your entire life gives you a nickname because you are close to them because of this, is super weird. But also super awesome. And it's like, that's really cool, or someone will just text you out of the blue.
Yeah.
You're like, I never thought I would ever know this person or even meet this person. But then, like, on your birthday, or like,
yes, exactly.
Oh man, I just did an interview and it was nowhere near what we had, or whatever. Or like, you just get a random text, you're like, holy shit. But then I struggle again with, but why does that matter than my best friend texting me and saying, hey, good job? No, but this guy said it. Like, why?
because there's some kind of there's some kind of validation, right? There's some form of validation because the way I look at it, like again, like I said earlier, no one in my day-to-day life understands or realizes, again, because they probably don't care about this type of music and stuff like that, so they don't even realize the bands or like, there are definitely like when I interviewed Jacob from Converge, I was like, or Daryl from Glassjaw. Well, a lot of people got the Daryl from Glassjaw thing because I just am a wild fan of that band and have been for 20 plus years. So my day-to-day friends know because I have like every other shirt that they've ever made. So they know that that was a big band for me. So but I'm like, dude, Converge is like one of the fucking cornerstones of like hardcore and, or modern hardcore, metalcore. So it's like, that's huge. No one knows who Converge is really in the grand spectrum of music, but that little pocket of the world does. And, that's a little tip of a little feather in the hat for me, a little check mark on the boxes and stuff like that. And there are guests, and Chino's one of those guests that I would love to have on because again, I've watched that band or listened to that band for 30 years at this point, almost. And it'd be crazy to get those people on the pod. There are people that I don't think will be ever on the pod, but it is what it is. And I try to keep it remotely around heavy music or extreme music, keep it adjacent to that for the most part. So it does limit me and my guests. But again, I use it because I watched that No Jumper podcast in its early infancy days, and a lot of rappers or a lot of artists that were on that show got known a little bit better, because of that. So there is a mixture that I try to do of like, yes, Lambgoat is a legacy based outlet. It's been around for longer than most other outlets have been. It's covered metal and hardcore for longer than anyone else out there for the most part. There are bands, and there's people that go to the website daily every day, and they're around my age, and that's just some people are addicted to it. Bands are addicted to it. Look in the comments and this, that, and the other. But there's also I just spaced out. But no, okay, yeah. I tried to maybe showcase some of the younger up and coming bands to the audience that's already embedded in at Lambgoat. But then I also want younger kids to know about the older stuff too, and I want to do a nice mix of both, so to speak. So I juggle that all the time, and that does hurt reach and listens and downloads when you're doing small bands that no one gives a shit about. But there are bands that we've had on the podcast that if people look back now, they're much bigger, and we had them on at such an early time. And to me that kind of makes like, okay, well, we were there in the beginning or near the beginning. I'm not saying that we found these bands or anything like that, but that's also like a thing that probably keeps me doing it. I will say that I had a great time the year that I did not do it, just because it wasn't stressing me out of like book it, because I'm the only one that does this. Like I don't have someone that helps book or schedule or anything like that. Like I hit you up, I sent you an invitation, and then here we are.
So that's the way it should be.
Yeah. But again, you have other shows you're competing with that are much larger, have bigger operations, have budgets, so to speak. I mean, I do get a couple of pennies every month from the podcast, but it's you can't even go out. I can't go out to eat a couple times on that, with that money I've made. So it's for the love for the most part, but I also know it's part of the outlet, it's part of the branding, it's part of the, you post things on social media, so people go to the website. This is kind of like I'm posting this on Apple Music and Spotify. If people find it, they might visit the website, right? So it's all like a funnel to the website for the most part. But then again, it is some kind of self-gratifying talking with guests whom I've loved for most of my life, or establishing new conversations with new bands and forming relationships with those people as well. So there is some kind of
it's self-serving kind of things where
yes.
I mean, there's times like there's
but the
a
stress,
lot to this.
But you're right. The stress is fucking.
Yeah.
I question it every day too.
It's stress. It's like, and it's stress, and then I try not to care. Like, you know, go into it. I do like the stress lets me know I still care, but I try to not focus on that. Like, there's times like I had Monkey on from Corn,
Mm.
and I love Corn since I was a kid. Like, I had their posters on my wall, and like, um, that first record like changed my world. And then flash forward, fast forward
Yep.
to, you know, a few years ago when we did it, and I'm giving him pedal ideas and like how to fuck with his pedals in ways he hadn't seen before. He's writing them down so he can try it out. Like, what the fuck is going on here? You know, like the stuff like that is cool. Or like we were talking about like bands that got bigger. When I reached out to Courtney from Spirit Box had 7,000 listeners on Spotify. I was like, this is insane, amazing music. I just hit her up on her personal email that was on the website. She's still doing data entry work or whatever, and we did an awesome episode. I've not been able to get her back since. There's like 7 people between me and her that, you know, I could send her a text or whatever, but it's not. I'd rather just do it the right way.
Yeah. I get that.
And my friend Charlie's her publicist, and Charlie is wonderful, but Charlie also has to go through those people as well. And if they don't give her time, she can't do anything about it. And so she, God bless her, she tries so hard. But then I was kind of like, all right, you know, if it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. I've already had her on. It was a great conversation, some pretty amazing stories. Touring Russia, and like some drunk cab driver watching porn while driving him through a field to get to a show. Hilarious shit. But you know, they're still on the come up at that point. They were so small, and then they just blew up, and I was so happy because they're so good, and I could hear it then, like how. And we by no means discovered anyone, but seeing that trajectory was amazing. Another thing I want to touch on real quick is going back to something we were talking about earlier with, you know, getting into these subjects with people, you know, not wanting to make it awkward or whatever, I think is what we were saying. For me, I don't feel like one of my biggest, if I was to like take emails and direct messages and categorize them on what they were about or how they started, and the ones that started with, I love the first 12 minutes of your show, because they want to know how I'm going to segue into whatever deep conversation is going to happen, because you have that little bit of small talk, get to know you kind of stuff. And then when's it going to happen? When's it going to say, you know, they love to hear that awkwardness.
Yeah.
Because by the end, it's not awkward anymore. But even if I know part of a story of somebody and what they've been through, I don't feel like I deserve or have earned the right to talk to them about it until we have a rapport. And if that rapport doesn't happen, I don't bring it up.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like I can say, hey, how you doing? Tell me about your kid dying. Like, I haven't earned the right to get to there yet, because I haven't given anything of myself to them yet, to you know, lighten the load a little bit, or, you know, you got to give and take. Like, you got to give some of yourself to get anything. And that's one thing I view as podcasting, putting ourselves out in the world every week. Take some balls, because it's, I mean, that's there for a long time, and a lot of people don't have the fortitude to do that, or the confidence. But like I said, I don't feel directly off the bat that I have the right to even ask about those things. They come up and we dig into them and it's natural, sure. But you'll never hear me just go right into something.
Yeah.
Even if they're hinting at it. If I don't feel like it's the right time yet, I'll glaze over it. But it's in my head.
Yeah.
Like, okay, the next time we'll come around to this. Maybe we'll dig it a little deeper. And like, like Karina from Pussifer, she's been on twice, and she was a little nervous to come on, and we went into some insane conversation. My dad just died. Like, we went into some conversation about grief that I'll never forget, and that made her tell her husband, Greg Edwards from Failure, like, hey, you should do this one, because I had a good time.
Yeah.
And it's a safe spot. And so he came on. We had a blast. But he was, not against podcasts, but like, he doesn't do a lot of them because of that reason. He feels kind of out there. And she's like, no, you should do this, you know? Or I had Elena Hicks on for, she went by Bonnie Rotten for a long time as a porn star. Awful story of kidnapping and drugs, and literally just got destroyed and spit out the other end, and ended up marrying Jesse James, who's the massive
Motorcycle guy?
Monster Garage guy,
Yeah,
motorcycles. He does firearms. And she texted me afterwards and said, hey, I told Jesse about the show and how it went, because he hates when she does interviews because people just go at her about everything. And he was super stoked on how it went and really glad she did it, because I let her talk. Like, I let her say what she wanted to say and didn't try to bait her into anything, because that's not what I do. And I love when those comments come from people that were actually on, that had a good time, because it's like, okay, we did it right, you know? So those things pump me back up again when I'm thinking of stopping, you know?
Yeah. I have that, because I think about stopping all the time, and I'm sure people would love me to do so. But again, I'm in the Lambgoat verse, and so Lambgoat is synonymous with, like, anonymous and sometimes negative comments. But those don't only pertain to, like, the bands or the news stories that are, posted. I receive a lot of negative comments about me in general. So I read those too. And, at this particular point at my age, I'm also like, I just don't give a shit about those comments in general. I can read them and it doesn't bother me. But every now and then I might start feeling like, why am I fucking doing this podcast? A comment on YouTube will pop up about, like, oh, this fucking was the best interview I've heard from so-and-so. Great job. Or, I'll get somebody replying to a social media post saying something similar to that. And I'm like, okay, I know that there's going to be a lot of negativity on the internet regardless, so it takes a lot more for someone to post a positive comment, especially in the Lambgoat verse. So I take those to heart. I still think that I'm a horrible podcaster. I still think I'm a horrible interviewer in general. I lose my train of thought quite often, and I have to just, like, go with that. Or I have a hard time paying attention to, like, the guests when they're talking about long things. And in my Lambgoat's been around so long, a lot of people just, like, reference old Lambgoat stuff that I don't know everything, so I have to then be like, yeah, I'll play along. But, I also do my homework. As far as Lambgoat and, like, music history is somewhat concerned, anytime that I can and have time to, I'm going down rabbit holes, finding out more and more, because I am so nervous about not being exposed, but just, like, this guy's a poser, obviously, clearly. He doesn't know anything about this or that or whatever. And, of course, I'm not going to know everything about every band or every person, and I'm not going to bring up everything that the listener or the viewer wants to hear about either. Because, like you, I'm not going to bring up things that I know are going to be awkward for the guest or whatnot, because I'm not here to, like we said earlier, I'm not here to get clickbait headlines and stuff like that. Now, if someone picks up something on the podcast, that's different. But, I literally, like, we just started doing clips of the podcast, right? So, like, the podcast has been around for 4 years, and it's basically just, like, me shooting it out on the website, or no, me shooting it out on social media. And then whoever listened. It wasn't like I was, marketing the shit out of it. And it wasn't even on the actual website until a year ago. So, now there's a podcast section on the website because we took it over and we implemented that. And I had to upload all those podcasts and categorize, and do all that shit. So it took a while. But, yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those things where I haven't done anything like this for this long as well. Like, I didn't realize the commitment was going to be so grand, and, like, here we are, 150 plus episodes through it. And again, like, you've had yours for multiple years. Ray's had his since fucking, I don't know, 2011 or something like that.
Yeah, 10 some years.
Yeah, so there are, and Jost is doing his. I don't know what the frequency of everyone's output is. I tried to do one a week. I've yet to be able to go a year and have 52 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
I might do 51 or 50. But I try to stay to that as much as possible to be more consistent, because obviously consistency is king and key to everything.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a task, and like you said, a job, and it does become that, and you do have to spend time thinking about it. And like I told you earlier on, I don't do any research for the most part. I want it to be as casual as possible. So the beginning of my podcasts are usually ridiculously awkward, because depending on the guest, I may just be like, holy shit, what am I doing here with this person? Because again, like,
Mm-hmm.
I do sometimes feel like a giant outsider, because I'm not in a band. I don't come from, I mean, I was in the music scene, but like on a very small local regional scale, nothing big.
Mm-hmm.
No one knows who I am. I just tweeted Alex about fucking making a podcast, and then you blink your eye later, and I own the company, and I'm doing 150 plus podcasts. So
Mm-hmm.
it's strange where life takes you, obviously, and that, I think, that also keeps me doing the podcast. That whole, like, how it came about and where it got me to. Uh, I have this thing about saying yes to everything that comes my way. So whether that's good or bad, I do take the opportunity to have the experience of whatever is coming, whether it's, I know it's going to suck, or I know it's going to be good, because sucky things become great things later in life that you can think about and talk about and laugh about. So you have that experience or whatnot. So I try to do that as much as possible, but it's been a wild world, because obviously there's way more podcasts than ever now. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a little easier in the earlier, 2018 when I just started, because there wasn't that many out there. And, now, like Knotfest has a whole podcast situation, and Metal Injection, Metal Sucks, or whoever has podcasts and stuff like that. And they have multiple people working on them, and I'm just here by myself treading water in the deepest part of the pool, just being like, can I get you on my podcast? And there are people that don't want anything to do with the website or
Mm-hmm.
the brand. And, this is something I have to deal with, but that's also something I have to combat as
Mm-hmm.
as a brand, and just try to not, again, I don't want to make it a safe space, because there has to be some rough edges around Lambgoat for it to remain Lambgoat.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to be able to have people who don't like Lambgoat be on the podcast, chat with me, and then be able to be like, okay, I get it. The comment section, or the thing I don't like about Lambgoat, is not the person behind Lambgoat. Whereas it might have been prior. I don't know. I didn't have a day to day with Alex for 20 years, so it is what it is. But
Mm-hmm.
here we are.
Yeah, dude. I was watching a interview with Marilyn Manson the other day, and I don't remember. It wasn't from too long ago, but he was saying that. Trying to think how he phrased it. Um, you don't judge an artist by the people that love them. You judge them equally by the people that hate them and the people that love them, because uh, it gives you a clearer picture and more of a thing to not take the negative as negative, but as a positive, that you're making people feel things, and that's the goal. I mean, feel something good, feel something bad. I mean, it's maybe they're having a bad day, maybe they're not, maybe they just hate you. I get bad comments all the time, I get bad messages all the time.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell's
How could
wrong
you
with you?
not?
Like, where's this guy's a legit moron? Things like that. I'm like, I just laugh. I'm like, that's the other reason I struggle with podcasting too, is if I didn't have the podcast, I would be completely off social media 100%.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I don't say this to bring up a social media conversation, because that is podcasting 101. If you have nothing to say and you'd have no idea what you're doing, you're going to talk about social media for an hour and a half of, oh my God, in my day, that it's the easiest subject to go for an hour on is social media. But I would be completely off, because I'd have nothing to post about, because that's all I do is post the new episode. That's it. And that's why I have Instagram on my phone. I don't use it for anything else. But I find myself scrolling through it for a long time, like, why am I doing this?
Yeah, yeah.
And I have nothing against the internet. Like, there's a lot of sites and stuff I'll go to and stuff, but like social media itself, I don't like it. And I would love to have it out of my life. And I think I can't do that until the podcast is over. So I've joked with friend. I think we have a mutual friend, John Beatty from the Brutally Speaking podcast, who just got out of foot surgery like a couple hours ago. We talk about stuff like this, and I was like, man, maybe I'll just go to episode 400 and stop.
Yeah, I was going to ask, when do you see a light? Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel?
I don't, but I think if I was to stop, I would stop on a random episode.
Yeah,
like
just fade to black.
402 or like just be gone and leave that to the world. Like I wouldn't take it down because I believe in all of it.
Yeah,
but
we also
definitely
you're becoming a part of the story, and that's also another thing. And I learned that with the Jordan podcast. I was like, yes, I'm losing out on a lot of positive things for the podcast and possibly Lambgoat. Yes, I'm losing that. But I'm now a part of this weird story somehow, which I never thought I'd be a part of. Because, you obviously have heard about that episode and didn't know that it was so part of that is another thing, too, that I like doing this is because I get to become part of the lore, so to speak, of the scene or the industry or something like that. And that is also, again, self-satisfying for me, but I don't get a lot out of the podcast, so to speak, like especially compensation-wise. It's just, I guess it's kind of like a hobby. And people do understand that I am a podcaster. None of my friends listen to this podcast, but it is what it is. But I like intertwining myself in the story of whatever. So self-gratification or whatever. I'm sure I'm going to get some shit for that, but that's part of the reason why I started it. I wanted to interview bands differently than the way I used to do it when I had my old website or something like that. The reason and I know Rogan gets a lot of shit because he's just one of the biggest podcasters on the world and he has a lot of guests. He says a lot of things. He has a lot of opinions, but that really changed a lot for me. Like, it just seemed like a conversation. And here I am just watching or listening to 2 people talk for 3 hours or something like that. That blew my mind after a while. And I just wanted to do something similar to that and make it remotely interesting enough for someone who's a casual fan of not only Lambgoat, but possibly the band to enjoy what I'm extracting out of the conversation. And it's taken me a long time. And I said I'm not the best podcaster or interviewer. I think very lowly of myself in those buckets, but it took me a long time to shut the fuck up and let the guests talk. You learn a lot of things because it's not so structured. And, in the beginning I did research and I would get way more nervous, and not saying I don't get nervous, but I would do some things and, get some topics up or whatever. But then I started realizing, like, these people already fucking talk about whatever's on their Wikipedia page or whatever they've already said on a podcast or whatever. So, I'm just going to come and talk to them about whatever rabbit hole they want to bring up. Like I've had hour-long conversations just about aliens, not about the band or the person that's in the band, right? Just talking about random shit. Or, I had David Bland from Full of Hell, like you said, some dark shit. Like you had some dark shit on podcast. David was on our podcast, and his dad died from COVID like that week or something like that. And I was like, dude, we do not have to do this right now. But he was very adamant about doing so. And, he talked about it. And it's also somewhat therapeutic for these people too. Not just in that aspect, but just in general. Like, and I've learned that over the years that it serves them too to get a lot of stuff out that maybe regular interviews don't allow or whatever, or this, that, or the other. So it's a love-hate relationship with podcasting, like I'm sure you have.
Mm-hmm.
I don't foresee me stopping in the near future. I would, I don't know, maybe I'd like to hand this particular podcast off to somebody else to host, but I would like to still podcast. I just feel like there are other podcasts out there that people that are in bands that are just better at it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's me looking down on myself and just being more hard on myself than I probably need to be. And I'm sure there's people that, because I do know people that enjoy and follow the podcast and who have for years. And, you know, they're always commenting and messaging me about how this podcast or this episode was good. And I love that you talked about that. So, you know, I don't know. I'm surprised as shit that I'm 150 plus episodes in, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I never thought that.
Well, there's a few things that come to mind here, and excuse me. For one, the Jordan episode, like,
and
I've
I hate
had
bringing
Keith
that up
on,
because
and
I hate bringing that up. I hate bringing that episode up because I know I don't want Jordan to feel weird about it, about that episode, and I don't want
think he
people.
does.
Yeah, okay.
But I don't like. That's the thing. Like, I'm not a diehard Every Time I Die fan. Like, I had Keith on because I wanted to talk to him. Interesting guy. I haven't listened to an Every Time I Die record since Hot Damn.
Damn.
And saw him live twice because I was working the show. I never went on my own. And then I listened to Radical, which was great. It was a great record. But I saw them. What's the peripherally? They're always in my periphery because I wasn't a huge fan. They had some good parts. I love Keith's lyrics. Like,
Yes.
he always he shouts and repeats some very profound lines, and those are my favorite part of that band. And then my buddy Goose starts playing drums for them, so I started paying attention again. So I was like, oh, Goose isn't that awesome? And I went and saw him with shit, I can't remember what band it was.
Battle
It was
Lovers?
at the no, it
Oh,
was
no,
with
Goose,
Every
Goose.
Time
Oh,
I
yeah,
Die, but it was on a huge tour. It was at the Moda Center here. Fuck. They were opening the show, and they had like church cathedral light set up, and they were the opener. And Andy from Fall Out Boy was there. He's a buddy of mine, and ran to him in the back. What fucking? Oh, it was Mastodon and Coheed.
Yeah, I was gonna say Coheed.
Yeah, because I was there to see Josh from Coheed and Travis. Anyway, not a huge fan of that band. The world is a huge fan of that band.
Yeah.
So what I want to say about that is, first off, I'm curious if you actually deleted it or it's just sitting somewhere, because that also says something. But also, the fact that Jordan's going to bring up that episode every interview he does from now on. And I think that's worth more than the damage that it would have caused to release it and the numbers you would have gotten that would be fleeting and not stuck around. I think you've done the long game with that by having him every couple months bring it up again to where it becomes lore.
Yeah.
And it becomes myth and it becomes legend, and no one will ever hear it. And that is fantastic from a podcast standpoint. I think you really did the right thing, but you're also getting benefits from doing the right thing in that aspect without hurting anyone.
Yeah.
And I love that. That's fantastic.
I appreciate that.
The other thing that comes to mind is talking about, letting people talk and being a conversationalist. If you want to learn in 1 hour how to be a better podcaster and listener, interview Buzz from the Melvins.
I've done that.
Then interview him twice, because he speaks in a way that is not human. And he finishes his sentence 4 seconds after he stops talking, which throws everything off.
Mm-hmm.
Fat Mike, interview Fat Mike. Same thing. He answers the question you wished you asked him. So just don't go in with any questions.
Yeah.
But there's a thing called the Fred Rogers rule. I think it's called Fred Rogers rule, where you wait 1 to 2 seconds after someone stops talking, because they're probably going to say something else as it comes to them that's even better.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's one thing I learned very early on. And then interviewing Buzz face to face in next to a minivan was also very challenging. But then the second time I had it, I knew what I was in for. I knew his cadence, and I matched it, and it made a much better time.
Yeah.
And so those are two guys to really practice. You had Buzz on, so I'll have to check that episode out.
That was one I was really nervous about. I'm really nervous about that one. I didn't know anything really
Everyone
about him.
is.
Well, I didn't really know anything about how he did interviews by any means. But again, there are bands that are kind of like huge in the world of that I'm in that I just am like, oh, I don't want to fuck it up. You know what I mean? And that I don't, and I feel like I'm under a microscope with fucking, being Lambgoat. And so it's one thing, but like, yeah, I definitely was nervous, but I was glad that he was like, I was like, oh, this guy fucking talks. So I was just like, I'm just going to sit back, kind of let him kind of drive.
He has the best laugh. I love Buzz. He's been a fantastic person to meet through this show, and he's been on 2 or 3 times, and he's always got a good quote about Kurt Cobain. He's always got an amazing quote about vintage gear because, like, as a musician myself, vintage guitars were new when people bought them. That's why I like new guitars. Jimi Hendrix didn't go buy a vintage guitar. He bought a new guitar, and it sounded great. And my new guitar sounds great. And he's just very matter of fact. And I think that's why people are nervous to interview him, because he's so matter of fact. He is basically responsible for Nirvana becoming as huge as they were.
Right.
And Dale from the Melvins, who I've had on 3 times, was in Nirvana. So like there's always good stories for that. And people are always like, why didn't you talk more about Kurt Cobain? Tired of talking about Kurt Cobain. That's why. Losing my train of thought here, but there was one other thing I wanted to mention to you about, I lost it.
Well, to answer your question about the Buckley podcast, it is on a USB in my closet. It's not on a computer, just for the sake of it not being online, right? I keep it there because at one point, it's just daunting to listen to it all, probably. It's just fucking 6 hours long or something like that. It's some insane long piece of, media. At some point, I do want to go back and listen to it just because there was so much in there that I'd probably, I forgot 89% of it or something like that. But I also was like, I can't have it on my computer because anything could happen and it could get out. But, and I may listen to it at some point and then throw it away or delete it or something like that because, again, I don't necessarily know if it needs to be out there. But, to answer your question, it is not online per se or on a device. It's just sitting in a box in a USB in the closet.
Let it grow in lore for another 3-4 years till Better Lovers have a couple records out. Many Eyes have a couple records. I don't know if they're going to have a couple records out. Doesn't sound like they will. But, and then hit up Jordan and hopefully him and Keith have maybe come back together somehow and say, I want to send this to both of you. And if you guys agree, I want to put this out on the Lambgoat website for $5 and donate all that money to some charity that you both agree upon, because people will pay that money and download it.
Oh yeah.
And you make it just like when Louis C.K. puts out a new special, he makes millions of dollars. It's genius. On the website, but say, we'll donate it to a charity or whatever, but then the world can finally hear it. That may be a cool idea. The thing I was going to say is, I remembered it. I always talk about podcasts being a journal for my kids when I'm gone. And I did the math, and it's 27 days straight of me talking so far. It's in some insane number, 27 or 29 days. But then someone flipped it on me. I don't remember what guest it was. And they said, wouldn't you think they would listen to it when you're gone and wonder why you spent so much time not actually just hanging out with them? And I was like, son of a bitch. You just ruined my entire ethos of the show. But then I'm talking to my mom last night. We were talking about my dad. And because my mom doesn't listen to the podcast. I don't even think she knows what it's called. And my dad listened to every episode. So I did an episode 2 days after he died. And the intro, outro, the episode was already done. And now every year on the day he died, I listen to that and I hear my voice and I hear the tone of my voice, the everything, the sound, the cadence. Like I was in complete shock still.
Mm-hmm.
But that's documented and I can go back and listen to that anytime I want. But I do every in September every year, go back and listen to it because it puts me back in that headspace for a minute. And that's kind of cool. It's like an audio journal that
Yeah.
That's the only time I go back and listen to things is stuff like that. Or, this happened on this day. Oh, I did an episode that day. Let me go listen and just listen to, 10 minutes.
Yeah. I do go back and listen every now and then. It's not very often. And I'm surprised I honestly haven't gone back and listened to the Jordan podcast just because I get asked about it quite a bit, obviously. And, everyone wants to hear it and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, not happening. Like, because again, like, what I do, send it over the internet to somebody and then that gets fucking out somehow. And that's not going to happen at all. So,
no, don't ever do that.
No. And again, it's a lot to take in. It's a whole lot of media to take in at one time. So
yeah,
it is what it is. But yeah, I do go back and listen to them every now and then. And sometimes I do impress myself thinking like, oh, you kind of did that episode okay. You know what I mean? But then, it doesn't take long for me to be like, you fucking suck, dude. So just keep in check.
Yeah, it's something you can say when people say that you suck at what you're doing is just say do better.
Yeah.
Go do it and they won't.
Do you do research on guests and stuff like that? Like what is your approach?
No.
Like, yeah, because I do think that some people do. They have to, right? They take it seriously. And not saying that I don't take it seriously, but they take it to a different level. And I always am worried that like I'm always worried when I do a podcast that the person's gonna think like, good Lord, what the fuck did I just waste my time doing? You know what I mean? But there's been a lot more than not that they've enjoyed it. Like you said, like, people will enjoy it. And it just, I don't know, kind of blows my mind. But again, I tell everybody before the podcast for the most part, I'm like, I've been working all day doing Lambgoat stuff, and this is the time I've carved out to talk to you. And I'm only going to, I don't know what we're going to talk about. I don't do any research beforehand. I don't know everything about the band. The audience doesn't want to hear me talk. They want to hear you talk. So, 3, 2, 1, hit record. I don't edit anything. Nothing is ever edited. So whatever we record is whatever we put out. People have asked me to remove stuff, and I'm like, I don't do that. So, after the fact, they've asked me to remove it after the fact, like after it's out. And I'm like, that, if I take it down, it's probably worse than removing it and putting it back up or something like that,
Yeah.
So just kind of leave it out there and people will forget about it.
Yeah, my process is simple. Like my cousin asked me when I first started, like, what are you going to do? Just a bunch of musicians? And I was like, I don't know. I talk to anybody really. And now it's, if I have a genuine interest, I'll talk to anybody. If I don't, I won't. Like I've turned down tons of people and I turn down people all the time. I delete, I don't know, 40, 50 emails a day without even reading them most of the time. From just pitches of like, so-and-so's new album or blah, blah. Like, I don't care. I just delete.
Are the press people hitting you up? Is that who's hitting you up? Like PR
constantly.
People? Yeah.
Constantly.
I feel weird about that too because we have like a working somewhat relationship and I know it's like give some, take some kind of thing. And but like you, if I don't have interest for the most part in it, it's going to be really hard for me to go like an hour with somebody.
Oh, they know that. And that's why they'll now, most of them hit me up like, hey, so, I got you scheduled in for so-and-so. Let me know if you want the record or any more information, but I know how you are, so you're good to go. And I was like, yep, perfect. I don't need anything else. And so they don't send it to me. It's awesome. Like, but they'll always offer, like, do you want this? No. My process is simple. In the beginning, I'd write 2 or 3 pages of notes just to have it in my head because I didn't want to waste anyone's time. By episode, I remember it's in the 50s. Jeff from Thursday saw that I had a notebook and I didn't even open it. And he's like, "Are those your notes?" And I was like, oh yeah. He's like, you didn't even open it. Like, yeah, I know. He's like, that's pretty cool. And I was like, you know what? That is kind of cool. I don't think I'm going to do notes anymore. And I looked from that day on, I never took notes again. Um, I didn't prep. And that's also not a flex either. It's just,
No,
it's
it's not a
only
flex on me
exciting to
either.
me. It's exciting for me to not be prepared,
Mm-hmm.
but to be very prepared at the same time. I'm very prepared. I put myself in a headspace where I'm very prepared to receive what's being given to me, listen to what's being told to me, digest it, have a clear head. So I work very hard and prepare very hard to be open. I do not prepare content.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I want to make that clear. Like I am very adamant about, I don't eat 3 hours beforehand because I don't want my mouth to sound like I'm still salivating and digesting food. Like I don't like these are cardinal things because I'm coughing and stuff. I
Right.
never have a bottle that's closed. So you hear the screwing of the cap. I don't have things in my mouth like I do now with a fucking cough drop. But I normally don't do these when I'm in this situation. But like these are things that I don't do because I don't want any distractions. Because for me, I need to be open and available. And that's something I learned very much from the Ross Robinson episode I did, where we really connected on a lot of levels. And I had to just lay on the floor afterwards, about 20, 30 minutes in the dark and just contemplate what just happened.
Yep.
Because we locked into each other over Zoom through the eyes. I don't know what it was, but I was taken over. He was taken over. We were crying, like, and we still to this day, like, hit each other up over text. They're like, hey, I was thinking about this with you, like, and we'll do another episode soon. But like, he, that's another one that got taken over the second it came out. Every site, Rolling Stone, PRP, Guitar World, everywhere was picking up on Ross Robinson says this about Slipknot's first record, or
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
told me
Of
the
course.
story of Jonathan Davis doing Daddy and how the tape ran out the second he closed the door when he was actually done crying, and how spooky that was. That the second he closed the door, you hear the tape go and run out, like insane. And that's where he was crying the most, was reliving that. Um, and I didn't get to talk to Jonathan much about that because I only had half an hour with him, which I also normally don't take.
Yeah, I hate that.
But I had an hour, and then he was super exhausted after that show. I was here at like 1 a.m. Because he does them after shows. He's like, if someone wants to talk to me, they'll do it when I want to do it. I'm like, it's fine with me, man. Like I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. And we had a great conversation, but I didn't get to delve into that kind of stuff with him,
Right.
which maybe next time we will. But
Do you do it in person, or I mean, because you said you did Ross over Zoom? Like, what do you? What's the bulk of your? Is it in? Because you're in Seattle or
Portland.
Portland? Okay.
Mm-hmm. A majority are over Zoom since the pandemic.
Yep.
And I really realized I hate doing interviews on show days. It's so busy. No one's focused on anything but the show.
That's true. Yeah.
Things get bumped. Things are loud. Things are hectic. I wait till they're off tour or on a day off in a hotel room where they can focus because I give it the same reverence, I guess. So I'll ask, like, is it a show day? Yeah, it's like, they after sound check. No thanks. Is 25 minutes okay? No, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm very selective that way. And so when it is in person, it's usually on a day off. Or if it's a friend of mine, like the Thrice guys, who I love dearly, and they were one of my first episodes that I did, the whole band was like, hey, you're starting a podcast? Let's do it with all of us. And we all went backstage and did it. Like they supported me, like
Do
they
you like
believed in
that
me
though? Do you like
before
having
it
multiple
ever.
people on?
No,
Yeah.
I hate it.
Same.
But this was my first interview for the podcast, and I was doing it with Tepe. And because it came out episode 3, but it was the first one I actually did. And I go to meet him, and he's like, dude, all of our press canceled the whole rest of the day. And then Dustin's like, yeah, it's your podcast. Like, let's go do it. I was like, really? You guys all want to do this? And I'm like, yeah. And that gave me so much fire in my heart that they all decided to help me like get started. That was one of the most amazing gestures of any friend, and I've been friends with them for a long time since they're back in the van. But they wanted to help their friend out, and I fucked it up royally because I had the microphone set on the wrong setting.
Oh,
We
yeah.
sat in a circle, so you could only hear three of us
Nice.
the whole time. And so I vowed after they posted on their website that I had an episode with them. Check out our friend's podcast. My website crashed because so many people went there. And I got so many hate mail messages. I can't hear anything. This is terrible. So I vowed on the podcast, I will do an episode with every member individually to make up for this. And I did it. And now Eddie's been on like 6 times. Riley's been on 3 times. And the Tepe and Dustin episodes were the last ones that I did. And to complete the set and make up finally 6 years later for that awful. It was a great interview too. It was awesome. We told so many great stories, but I can't hear him either because the microphone was on the wrong setting. So I remember back to it, and it was a great time. They were all sitting around in a circle. Dustin put a piece of pita bread under the microphone so it would stop vibrating from the rider. And we all took a picture underneath the big picture at the Crystal Ballroom. And then we did it again like 6 years later. Like this is where it all started. And we all look so much older and tired.
Yeah, that happens.
But it's things like that where you get a little hand up from a buddy and or 4 buddies, and those things keep you going or get you going in the first place.
Right. I'm from Jacksonville, so there's another episode. There's only one other episode that I never put out, and that's because not because of the content on the podcast, but because I was with the Evergreen Terrace guys, and over the years I've gotten to know them on a personal level, just because that was one of the first bands I would really see live a lot. Being a young kid cutting his teeth out at the small little DIY venues and stuff. They were the band here, right? They were the band assigned to Eulogy, and they were touring and all that stuff. And then, I get those boys on the podcast, and there's 5 of them, and this is like my second podcast ever. And I'm like, I can't wrangle them in. I can't, there's not enough microphones. I had like 4 mics and they had 3 and I had 1. And, we were partying beforehand, right before the podcast. We were doing a little partying and I was like, fuck, dude, this is rough. And so I just didn't put it out because it was so hectic. And I've been chasing them down for 149 episodes or something like that, trying to get them back on the podcast. And
redo.
Yeah, we're going to. Obviously, they got some new stuff coming out. They just released some new songs and whatnot. So now there's a reason to do that. But the other thing you mentioned, like timing wise, like allotted time and stuff like that guests have. One of the things I do hate about doing podcasts and doing them through I don't like doing them through the PR people because obviously the PR people are going to be your access to the guest, and it's usually they're going to monetize that time for when they have something going on, like an album or a tour or something like that. And that I don't really care about what's going on because obviously the conversation is going to be loosely based around that, but I'm trying to go into other directions too. So I also hate that I get guests sometimes in their like press run, where they're doing press for 4 or 6 hours some of the day. And, I hate getting them for that hour or 50 minutes or whatever. So, and I hate the Zoom stuff too. But like you said, most of the bands that would do the in-person podcast, they would come to my house and they'd sit on my couch and hang out with my dog and, have beers from my fridge. And, but it was on show days, but usually it was earlier in the day to where we had hours and hours, before the show. But, those days are gone because COVID came and the use of Zoom has taken over. And yes, I do get a lot more access to bands that aren't coming through town and whatnot. And I do live in a small, not small, but I do live in a part of the world where a lot of bands don't really like touring Florida because it's out of the way.
I hated it.
Yeah, it's out of the way. You know?
And it's humid as
Well,
hell.
that is hot. Blah 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 blah. I
Oh
get all
my
that. I
God.
get
I
it. I
hated
get
every
it.
second I was in Florida.
But I live
I
here
won't lie
all
to you.
day long,
Ooh,
all my life. But
more power to you.
Jacksonville's also in that weird space between like Atlanta and Orlando, Tampa and Miami. And
Mhm.
you know, if a band comes to Florida, they have to play at least 4 shows to make it worthwhile. So, they'll go Orlando, Tampa, Miami, or in those areas, and then maybe Tallahassee, Pensacola on the way out. But not every tour package comes through Jacksonville. So I do take the Zoom podcast, but I do hate it. I do hate it.
I feel like if I wanted to get in a fight, I would go to Jacksonville.
Come on, dude.
But like the Miami's where Anatomy of a Ghost broke up, so I'm impartial to that. Or I have I don't know. I don't like Miami, but like I never did. But yeah, Florida. I don't do good in humidity. Like that's what killed it for me in Florida. The toll roads and the humidity. Great orange juice at all the truck stops. We loved like changing our minds and driving through the middle of a turnpike median through the grass and going the other direction. We love doing stuff like that. But I did like Orlando because Zach's uncle's like a competition barbecue guy. Make us an awesome meal, and then we would play our show. What's the venue in Orlando we'd play all the time? The
Social back booth.
It's got the really thin stage that goes along the venue.
Side, and there's like a bar across the way.
Is it the Social?
Social it has that little, I don't know if it's still there or if it's still called that, but yeah, they have a little thin bar or a little thin stage. There's like a little, there's some stairs down to the floor and into the bar. Yeah, the Social.
That's a Social. I love playing there. And then we would go, usually there's a big band like the Chili Peppers or something playing the stadium down the road. And his uncle would be out there selling sausages and stuff. And he makes his whole living from doing that.
Florida barbecue is not
family
something
and
to mess
everything.
with. Yeah, Florida barbecue is not something to joke about, y'all. I keep telling everyone that.
3 kinds of sausage and 4 different sauces. That's all he has. Simple. And he makes a complete living, has a house and everything, just doing that after shows at the stadium. Incredible.
I need to do a side hustle. Hot Dog Dave's.
So good. Dude, okay. I just had my life changed musically, and I posted about it randomly on social media. It's going to sound crazy. By Alanis Morissette. I went and saw Alanis. My friend Gigi is the tour manager for Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, and they were opening, and so I hit her up, and she got my wife and I into the show. 15th row center on an aisle where we had no one in front of us, so you could kick your legs out, like totally comfortable show experience. But when Alanis came on, I lost my absolute mind. It was one of the best shows I've ever seen in my life. It was that voice and the power and the control, and I couldn't even sing along because I was so mesmerized by what was happening in front of me. Completely revitalized music for me. Alanis. That's all I can say about it.
Yeah, no, I'm looking.
It was transcendent.
She's coming through.
I was like, dude.
So I'm definitely on. I'm going.
It's so good.
There was also
so good.
The Killing Moon, I think, covered "You Ought to Know" on one of these like Punk Goes '90s albums or like that.
Yeah,
I listened to that song so fucking much, dude. But I mean, I listened to that Jagged Little Pill because I mean, I was a kid when that came out. You know, my sister.
That record was so
good. Yeah, for sure.
You ought to know. I'll tell you this right now. You ought to know. When they were writing that record and no one wanted to sign her, and they went out to have another meeting with another hotshot, and she's like, I don't want to do any more of these meetings. Let's just do the record, blah, blah. She was in sweatpants. It's like, I'm not even changing out of my fucking sweatpants. I don't even care. We're going to get denied again. Who are they meeting with? Guy O'Siri. Guy O'Siri, she said, literally crawled across the desk to try to sign them once he heard those songs and changed her whole world wearing sweatpants. But you ought to know, the way they were recording the record is they come in the daytime and work, then they leave and go have dinner and come back and do a little more in the evening. You ought to know. They went to dinner, came back, probably still in sweatpants. She went in the booth and did one take of that entire song, and that's what's on the record.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
The first and only take. Incredible.
That's wild. That is wild.
Then you see her do it live now when she's happily married with kids and Dave Coulier is nowhere to be found. It still hits you like she's still ripped apart by this. Unreal.
Yeah.
It was unreal.
I'm looking forward to it. I am looking forward to it for sure.
Yeah. She runs the set like a professional. Like when a band comes out and does like 4 songs before they even say anything, she does that. By the 4th song, she's got a guitar on. And she's going 2 more songs and just slaughtering you with not even just hits, but like solid deep cuts that you're like, I forgot I love this song. And you're just mesmerized.
Yeah.
She'll blow your fucking mind. And I need to have her on the show at some point.
I'm looking forward to it. Dewey, it is dinner time for me. So I'm going to have to cut us short here. Not really short. We've been going for like an hour 45. So it just,
there you go.
It goes, you know, when it goes, it goes. I appreciate
podcasters.
Yeah, it's not a good thing.
Volatile mix.
It's not really, might not be the best thing, but for those who are very interested and are still here, thank you for listening for this long. But I will actually be in your part of the world, not that in a couple weeks. So if you're bored, we'll grab a coffee or something like that, and I will take in the Pacific Northwest dreary weather.
It's going to be 90 something.
Completely different than here. I'll bring the heat and humidity.
It's 93 right now.
Really? Is it?
Dead serious. 93 fucking degrees.
You guys should invest in more air conditioning.
Yep, we got it.
Yeah. Okay. Dude, thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
If you're still here, the Pure Pleasure Podcast, which I'm sure you already fucking heard about, but give it a listen. I'm going to go listen to the Chino episode because I totally forgot that you had that. And I need to go back and listen to that. And I'm going to daydream.
Listen to both.
Yeah.
There's 2.
I'm going to daydream about one day having him on the podcast. And then I'm going to daydream about having Fred Durst on the podcast. And then my trio of guests that I would really have wanted, I'll quit podcasting after that. Because I'll have Daryl, Fred, and Chino.
Godspeed.
All right, man. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.